Unit 4, the Constitutional Convention, Part 2. Problems and Compromises. The first major difficulty that the convention had to face was the struggle for power between the small states and the large states. The Virginia plan submitted by James Madison proposed 2 houses of Congress based on population. In that way, the large states will control the government. Also, these houses will appoint other important government officers, and therefore the large states will be in control of the entire government. On the other hand, the small states proposed the New Jersey plan, which would have made 1 house of Congress. This was also known as the Small State Plan and was presented at the Philadelphia Convention by William Paterson. All the states would be represented equally, regardless of size. Other provisions would have made the new Constitution much like the Articles of Confederation. A compromise was reached, sometimes referred to as the Great or Connecticut Compromise. The new government would have 2 houses of Congress. The House of Representatives, each state would be represented according to population, satisfying the large states. In the Senate, each state would be represented to equally satisfying the small state. Other compromises regarded slave trade, the term of the president, voting qualifications, and whether or not to count slaves as poor when deciding how many representatives the state would get in the House of Representatives. The 3/5 compromise decided that 3/5 of the slaves would count toward representation. Delegate distrust of the people. We can see that the delegates distrusted the people in a number of ways. For example, they decided that the president would be elected by electors from the state and not by the people as a whole. This was the Electoral College, which assigned electors to each state. Each state received as many electors as its total of senators and representatives in Congress. Later in U.S. history, these electors in the Electoral College will be required to vote for the presidential candidate that won the popular vote in their state. You will learn more about the Electoral College on page 33. What is the popular vote? It simply means that the vote of the people. So when a candidate in your state wins the popular vote in your state, he or she simply won more votes of the people than his or her opponent. A vote by only certain people, like a vote in the U.S. House of Representatives, for example, is not a direct vote of people, and therefore not the popular vote. Another distrust of the people can be seen in the election of the United States Senator. The Constitutional Convention decided that senators will be elected by the state legislature, not the people themselves. However, later, the 17th Amendment of the Constitution changed that. The people in the state now elect their senators. The lack of trust of the common people was due partly to there being very few representatives of a common man at the Constitutional Convention. 40 of the 55 delegates were wealthy enough to have loaned money to the government. 15 were slaveholders, and 14 held Western land. None were small farmers or working men, and the champion of the common man, including Jefferson and Henry, were not present. Many of the democratic features we know in our government today are features that were evolved since the Constitutional Convention. The writers of the Constitution may have had some distrust of democracy. However, they wrote a document that was flexible enough to provide the basis for orderly change. Most of these changes have made our country more democratic as the years have passed. If you need some examples of this additional democracy, think of how many more people today can vote, run for office, obtain an education, and exercise individual rights. This is also the time for students to have a definition of democracy. Democracy is simply government by the people, exercised either directly or through elected representatives.